understanding the history of these urban legends. Sugar doesn't actually feed cancer. People go, oh, I've got cancer, I better not eat any fruits and vegetables. Wrong. You better eat fruits and vegetables because...
Talk to me about anti-nutrients on a whole. How can you describe them to people who are listening?
First of all, anti-nutrient is not a scientific term. It's not a medical term. It's not even a term in nutrition.
Oh my gosh.
It is a conjured up term that, for gosh sakes, you definitely want to eat whole foods that actually do contain these natural sugars. You're not going for the sugar, okay? You're going for all the other stuff that the sugar's in, and it's not going to hurt you. It's going to help you.
It's literally the essence of this entire conversation today, of where these small conversations start and how it goes into hearsay and how it's very misinterpreted. It's basically Chinese whispers.
You know, everybody starts to think they're an expert in this stuff, and they're not.
It's true. This is why I started the show.
This is why podcasts like this, people who write books like me and you, we have the responsibility to be able to try to communicate with clarity.
People can actually figure out what's right for them as an individual who's got their own genetic makeup, and they can make their own decision. So what would you say are like the 5 foods that people should be including if we're thinking about reducing cancer risk or trying to starve that cancer?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you those 5 foods.
I'm your host, Sarah Ann Macklin, and I'm on a mission to uncover the maze of health myths around nutrition and well-being and guide you through my 7 pillars of health. Join me on a journey of discovery and connection, and pull up a pew for a front row seat to the most exclusive health conversations of our time. Welcome to Live Well, Be Well. If you've watched one episode and enjoyed it, I'd love to ask in agreement for you to subscribe to the show. Subscribing is such a small thing, but gives so much exposure, bringing bigger guests, bigger production, and more that we can deliver each week to more people. Every time you subscribe, it shows me that you enjoy the content. So if you do me a favor, and if you've enjoyed the show, please press subscribe. So, Dr. William Li, welcome back to Live Well, Be Well.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
I am feeling like I'm getting the very cool version of Dr. William Li today in your leather jackets, rocking up. I'm going to start by asking you some questions because we spoke, I think it was about a year ago now, and honestly, an hour was not enough to speak to you from writing 2 best-selling books. There was so much to depict, and within that conversation, you highlighted a new term to me that I'd never heard before, and you said, Sarah, I just want to start here by referencing a term that's going rife on social media right now. And that made me think about our conversation today. So I really want to start with diet trends, because you do so much work in looking at food as medicine to prevent disease, to kind of look at how we can stop, you know, the diet culture evolving and actually turning to food as medicine. And so I thought, what better way to start it with you than actually getting to the kind of core of what's going on at the moment in society. So I don't know if you've seen recently, there's been a new study that's come out around intermittent fasting. I'm not sure if you've seen the headlines on it recently, but it's caused quite a lot of controversy. Now, I want to point out 2 things before I ask you the question on this. One, the study was observational, so we know that we can't draw any causation. And 2, it's not been peer reviewed yet. But it was one of the things that I thought, it's so topical right now. And basically what the study showed was that it indicates that limiting eating to an 8-hour window daily might actually elevate the risk of mortality from heart attack and stroke, particularly among individuals with pre-existing cardiovascular conditions and cancer. Now, obviously, you can imagine the headlines against what everything's been going on around intermittent fasting. So first of all, I'd love to know your thoughts on the controversy of an opposing argument around intermittent fasting, because we spoke about this a lot on the last time we had a conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, the thing you're talking about is how we receive information and when we receive information. And just like any kind of news, timing is everything. You know, I think that when we receive health news based on research that has had the benefit of critical review, that's peer review, having experts look at the data, weigh the data, critique the methodology, and determine whether or not this is something that is needs to be sent back to the kitchen to be redone, or maybe even tweaked a little bit, or potentially just thrown out. Sometimes you do throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to research. And I have not yet had an opportunity to do a deep dive into sort of the headline making news that intermittent fasting is tied to higher mortality. But I can tell you that it's unlikely to hold up to scrutiny. And here's why. We all intermittently fast. When we're sleeping, we're not eating. We're not eating, we're fasting. So every night, we all intermittently fast. I mean, unless you're like somebody like going through medical training like I did, and you're being forced to stay awake for 36 hours. All right, we're not fasting there. We're probably eating some junk food along the way. But, most of us as humans, we are forced to sleep. When we sleep, we're not eating, we're fasting. So I think that this idea of, the other thing you brought up, which is a trend. Intermittent fasting as a term, as a practice, is in fact a trend. But intermittent fasting as a practice is something that we all do as humans. And by the way, not just humans, your cat, your dog, your parakeet, your goldfish, all practice intermittent fasting. So I just, as a scientist and as a clinician, hearing about this news that 8 hours of fasting is associated with poorer outcomes or mortality, I don't see the whys or hows that could actually be. So, let me just say, I respond to questions like the one you just asked as a scientist. I'm a researcher. I'm also a clinician. And one of the things that we always do, a good scientist and a really good doctor has to be a good listener and have an open mind. So as a scientist, I have an open mind. Could it be true? Does it make sense? Is there any plausible explanation for it? And the answer, all those three, probably not. I can't imagine that there is one. So, and especially when you say it's not yet been peer reviewed, this is the kind of the slippery slope we have in the digital age, where something can be released in pre-review form for everybody to see, you know, in its best form. Let's say at the beginning of the pandemic, pre-publication news for research was coming out fast and furious. Thank God.
Yeah.
We needed to know everything there was to know about it because it could really matter what happened to us and how we kept ourselves safe. But, you know, in the absence of a crisis, early review of information or early release of information is kind of like a leak. And I'm not saying that this is misinformation, but imagine if there was a Bond villain that was actually releasing information that just wasn't true. You know, I mean, I think that this would create headlines and we could all get confused. And Lord knows that in the nutrition space and the health space, we don't need more confusion. We need more clarity and we need trust.
Yes.
And that's, you know, one of the things that you and I started talking about last time is how do we get to trust the information and the analysis of what that information means? And so, you know, I would say there's so much information coming out about food and health and diet that is truly interesting, truly worthwhile, game changing in a lot of ways. And we should all focus on those things. And maybe as a tip to anybody watching or listening is that, look, when you hear that something hasn't been peer reviewed and it seems like a jaw dropping discovery, you know, maybe unless you're a scientist in that field, take a step back and say, you know what, let me wait for the final thing to come out. It's kind of like a movie trailer, you know, coming to a theater near you. The trailer always looks exciting, but, you know, let's wait to see the few reviews and see when the actual movie comes out, if it's something you want to spend the time watching.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why I started it with, and I wanted to start, it was very hard how to start this conversation because I think we've had so many different people come on here, including yourself, Dr. Sanchi Panda, Dr. Mindy Peltz, a plethora of people, Tim Spector, Sarah Berry, talk about intermittent fasting from a researcher's point of view. And I'm always really, really wanting to make sure that this podcast brings all the different news to people's ears to be able to listen from a true scientist perspective. And I thought maybe I won't include this. And I thought, no, every time I go on Twitter, even on when I'm looking on American news, like even CNN to the Times in London, it's all talking about this study. So it's really getting a lot of attention when I look at it and I think there's a lot of limitations to this study. It's not being peer reviewed and it's observational. So we're already taking this headline approach of scaremongering people that we shouldn't be fasting for 8 hours overnight, which is really our sleeping window. So that's the reason why I thought, you know what, we'll outlay everything here and we'll kick it off with something that is good for discussion. So I'm really glad that we brought that to the forefront.
It's important to, one of the things that I think is important to do and useful is not being afraid to myth bust. I think that for those of us who work seriously on the research side, if we see something that causes confusion, I kind of feel like it's almost my duty to try to say diplomatically and fairly, why one might want to be cautious about over investing in whatever it is that the myth is.
Totally. Okay, so intermittent fasting, 8 hours. Guys, do not panic. My second one. Now, this one I'm really interested to talk to you about because people might remember that your background before was in drug development. And you've gone through, I think it's 41, am I correct? FDA-approved drugs. 45! I mean, that's amazing. Okay, so you are one of the best people to speak to about this area. And I know that you've spoken about it before, but it's the GLP-1 antagonist, which for many people who might not know what that term is, it's also a brand called Ozempic, and there's many other on the kind of shops shelves that are very similar, but they're all these GLP-1 antagonists, which is the weight loss drugs. Well, they're actually diabetic drugs, but they're used for weight loss. And I wanted to kind of bring it to the forefront because we've never actually had an in-depth conversation about this before. And I think it's probably because in the last year, I didn't know anyone personally using it. And now I've known a few people in my vicinity using it, which has shocked me. And so that's why I wanted to bring this conversation to the forefront. Now, I was looking recently and Stephen Fry has come out in the press and said that he was using it and he stopped because he was vomiting 5 times a day and it made him so sick. And that was really quite fascinating for me to read. And now I actually saw you doing an interview on American TV because they're doing clinical trials to look at children to see if they're going to be able to use this drug as young as 6 because of the obesity rate. 1 in 5 American children are obese. And so they're looking at, is this one step to helping them? So I wanted to kind of look at this landscape and see what are your thoughts on this, because it is actually a diabetic drug. And many people might be confused that it's now actually coming in the UK to our supermarket shelves, so we can go and pick up this drug in a supermarket. So can you first of all just talk about what does this drug do and how does this drug work and who should be using it and who should not be using it?
Wow. Okay. Let me unpack that. So first of all, let's reel things back and try to take the big picture, because I think that having the frame of the big picture makes it a lot easier to understand the facts and what the conclusions are. Okay. So first of all, GLP-1. Those are 3 letters and a number that you might have heard of, but probably most people have no idea what they stand for. So it stands for glucagon-like peptide number 1, and it's a receptor. So a receptor is like a radar dish that actually receives signals, like hormonal signals, from the body. And the receptor, the dish, is attached to our cells. And for GLP-1, one of the things we've always known in the medical research world is that when you actually send a signal to the dish, what it does is that makes the cells that have the radar dish more sensitive to insulin, more easily able to absorb glucose, and more efficient in terms of helping to right size our metabolism. Okay. So for the reasons, because it can lower glucose and make insulin more efficient, for that reason, it was developed as a drug and it is true. My background has been in biotech drug development, so this is one of my wheelhouses. It was developed as a drug and approved as a drug because it works in clinical trials. That when you actually develop a drug that hits the radar dish, so we actually call it a GLP-1 agonist, agonizing the dish as opposed to antagonizing it. So it's an agonist. It triggers the radar dish. What that does is it makes your body absorb glucose better. Helps lower glucose levels, and of course, high glucose levels is sort of metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, diabetes, all kinds of issues with elevated levels of glucose. But by the way, I want to say why that's bad as well, because so many people talk about the glucose spike. The spike is less worrisome than continuously high levels. Okay, what you're worried about is really elevated, continuously high levels of glucose. So a GLP-1 agonist, the radar triggering system, signaling system, just helps to lower glucose. Your cells are more efficient. That's why this category of drugs was approved by the FDA and in Europe to actually treat people with diabetes. All right, type 2 diabetes in particular. It works pretty safe for most people with diabetes. And it's not the first line, meaning that this is not something you would reach for, certainly not in a grocery store to treat
I
diabetes.
know.
All right.
It's
Okay.
scary.
So I'm going to come back to the grocery store thing in a second. But so now, in experience of actually using the GLP agonists like Ozempic and Wegovy in the real world, one of the things that was noticed is that there's also along with improved metabolism, there's also quite clearly weight loss. So long before clinical trials were actually done, which they have been done, there was this observational phenomenon that people who were diabetics who were taking the Ozempics were actually losing weight, lots of weight. Okay, and so and this is really an observation that can be very useful because sometimes a drug developed for use A winds up being equally useful or maybe even more useful for use B. And an
Yeah.
example of that would be Viagra, okay, the erectile dysfunction drug. Do you know, Sarah, what Viagra was originally developed for?
Do you know, I feel like I do know this and I've gone blank. No.
Okay, Viagra was originally developed to lower blood pressure. And the reason it lowers blood pressure is that the mechanism, the PDE5 inhibitor, what it does is it causes your blood vessels to relax, to vasodilate. And so when your blood vessels widen, your blood pressure drops. Now, in this particular drug's case of Viagra, when your blood vessels dilate, your penis gets bigger too. Okay. And so like erectile function improves. And so what happened is that in the
Interesting.
clinical trial for hypertension, treating hypertension, because it works, the subjects who were involved in this study were observed to consistently have erections. And the drug company said, "Oh, wait a minute. Maybe we're aiming at the wrong thing here. Maybe it's aiming for something else." My point
Do you
being
know what this?
that,
Do you know what this
mm,
reminds me of?
mm,
And this will link into your work. I have Raynaud's syndrome, and many people on Raynaud's go on fluoxetine, which is an SSRI. Might have not said that correctly. Fluoxetine or fluoxetine.
mm,
It's an SSRI
yep,
drug. And when
yep.
they originally said to me, oh, you have such bad, severe Raynaud's, we're going to put you on this drug, and I said, isn't that an SSRI? And they said, yeah, but it's not all the high doses and it really works to help relax kind of the blood flow to get to your extremities. And that just made me think of these other kind of drug developments where it was obviously made for something else, but now it's being treated to use the
And
Raynaud's
and 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 in
syndrome.
fact, Viagra has also been used to treat Raynaud's disease. So the idea,
I've never been offered Viagra.
and I didn't just offer it to you. So
Recent studies in the UK have shown a concerning trend. Nearly a third of Britons suffer with insomnia or severe sleep disturbances, with stress, screens, and sleep hygiene largely to blame. This isn't just about feeling groggy in the morning. The NHS has linked poor sleep with a high risk in chronic conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and not to mention the impact on poor mental health. That's why I'm excited to share with you my experience with Natromat, a company that truly understands the science of sleep. Crafted in Devon with its organic, renewable materials, Natromat mattresses are a testament to what it means to sleep naturally. Unlike the common mattresses that trap heat and moisture, Natromat's use of organic wool and coconut fibre ensures your body remains at a comfortable temperature throughout the night, promoting a more deeper, restorative night's sleep. But what really sets Natromat apart is their commitment to sustainability. As the UK's first B Corp certified bed and mattress company, they're not just talking about environmental responsibility, they're living it. From their solar-powered workshops to their groundbreaking Mattress for Life initiative, choosing Natromat is a choice for a healthier planet. I personally visited Natromat's showroom in Chiswick and I was amazed at their sleep zone. It's designed to give you a real sense of how their mattresses can transform your sleep. The calming ambience, the bespoke sleep aroma, and the privacy to truly relax and feel the difference. It's an experience that I would recommend to anyone who is serious about improving their sleep quality. For my UK listeners looking to transform their sleep and by extension their health, I encourage you to visit naturalmat.co.uk. And don't forget, being a Live Well Be Well listener, you can get 10% off your first order using the code LIVEWELL. Invest in your sleep, your health, and your planet with Natromat.
But I will tell you that this is really kind of part and parcel of discovery and advancing medicine. So let me come back to the weight loss drugs. So one of the things that occurred, again, really in the social media, porous digital media world, people started using it and asking their doctors to get the prescription of a diabetes drug to really try to lose weight. All right. And it works, obviously. Clinical trials had not yet been done. And in the social media world and in the public, there was such a fervor that developed around a single treatment that could actually cause substantive weight loss that everyone went crazy and started to ask their doctors for it. Now, credit to the pharmaceutical companies, they began running clinical trials. And the clinical trials actually proved what was observed in the real world, that in fact, delivery of these GLP-1 agonists hitting the radar dish, making the cells more sensitive to glucose, did some other things as well, and it actually causes meaningful weight loss. So it was approved originally for morbid obesity, people who really had, we all know, we've all seen this probably, but people whose weight issues are so substantive that truly their inability to lose weight is life threatening. You're talking about somebody who is 300 pounds, maybe
Yeah.
400 pounds, like
People who might go for like a gastric bypass or something, those type of severe
100%.
surgeries where it's their only option. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And so for those individuals, this approval, which is really intended to be kind of a narrow window, like, hey, finally we have an option for somebody, that can be a life-saving solution. But the cat was already out of the bag, the horse out of the barn, okay? And everybody was flooding out to go get Ozempic initially. And in fact, there was such a head of steam to drive the public frenzy to get these drugs that in fact there was not enough a drug for the diabetic. The people with diabetes couldn't even get the
Oh
drug
my
because
gosh.
people who were just trying to fit and look better in a bathing suit were all consuming it. Now, first, let me say, as a doctor and as somebody who's been developing medicines, treatments for cancer, diabetes, vision loss, heart disease, etc., I firmly believe, even though I work in nutrition as well, I firmly believe that there is the right drug for the right person at the right time. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. However,
Yes.
the key thing is the framing of, like, who makes a decision when something's appropriate. Especially with these drugs in the United States, they require a prescription. You cannot get it in a grocery store. You need a doctor to agree to write a prescription in order for you to get access to it. So, I think some of the culpability of the widespread nature of use has to do with the fact that doctors aren't stepping up to help patients realize that, this is a potential treatment, but there are X, Y, and Z steps: exercise, lifestyle, diet. There's so many other things that you should be trying before that. And look, I also want to say that I don't have a problem with vanity. I don't have a problem with people who behave for vanity. Look, it's part of our human nature. It's important that we feel good about ourselves. So, and everybody knows this. You step out of the shower in the morning, you're stark naked, and out of the corner of your eye, you see in the reflection in the mirror, look, you're looking for lumps and bumps that weren't there that you don't want to have there, right? So that's natural. You want to fit into a bridesmaid's dress. You want to, you want to look good on the beach. Whatever it is, like, I totally get it. I think that's fine. But reaching for that magic bullet in this particular case is not the right way to go. So this is an example of an effective drug that actually has it's overuse outside of the realm of where it should be used. And what's happening is that people are bypassing all the other steps of diet and lifestyle, looking for that one simple answer. And if you haven't tried it yet, here's a couple of facts that people need to understand. First, and I'm giving it to in US dollars. I'll let the math people or the economists translate it. I'll let the American Express person in the airport translate it into pounds. But here's the thing. In the US, the drug actually costs $1,000 per dose. Number one.
It's
That's expensive.
crazy.
And what that
Yeah.
means is it's also not an equitable thing. Not everyone can have access to it. This is a very
No.
important modern topic in terms of healthcare. How, this is something for rich people only the wealthy, only 1% can get it. And so again, and people who can afford it, if you're paying $1,000 for that, what are you not using that money that you could be using it for that could be beneficial to your health, for example? Okay, mental health, physical health, a
Yes.
lot of other things. So I think that this opportunity cost is a big issue that nobody's talking about in terms of the cost of drugs. Second, insurance companies aren't always reimbursing for it in the United States. I don't know what the situation is in the UK or Europe, but passing the cost onto the healthcare system, probably not the best way to deal with a weight loss drug, especially for vanity reasons. And I think there's a societal kind of role that we all play to be able to use finite dollars in the smartest way. The third thing is that a lot of people don't know this. If you haven't had it before, you got to slam this into your belly yourself. Okay, so there was a movie that came out a few years ago called The Rock. And do you ever see that with Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery? It's about
No.
Alcatraz. Okay, well, there's a scene in it. I always
But
tell
I'm going
this
to
to the
watch it tonight after you've said this now.
it's an action movie where there's all kinds of escape from Alcatraz and military, and at the very end, the actor Nicolas Cage has to save himself from nerve gas that gets released, and in order to save himself, he's got to take a syringe and he plunges it into his heart and injects himself in order to save himself, which he does. Okay, so it all ends well. But can you imagine like injecting yourself every month with $1,000 drug? Okay, that's not like taking a pill. Okay, that's not like going to the gym. That's not like that's not trying to get good sleep, quality sleep, and lowering stress. This is sort of like something you got to slam into yourself. And although it works, we're also not really addressing the very real occurrence, like any pharmaceutical has, of side effects. So every drug has
Yeah.
effects and side effects. And so in the rush, in the enthusiasm to actually, lose your muffin top, all right, the fact of the matter is that people are kind of dismissing the medical issues associated with some of these drugs, just like you would have for any pharmaceuticals. So not only are you talking about gastrointestinal distress, one of the things that can happen is it can slow your stomach motility down. So your stomach is not digesting and pushing food down the chute the way it should, and so that can cause vomiting. It can cause, premature fullness. Like it can be very uncomfortable.
So
The
it
other
makes
thing
sense
that
about
can,
Stephen Fry, why he's
yeah,
vomiting 5 times a day and he's had to stop it because he's felt so
no,
awful.
no surprise. Secondly, you can lose, you can lose body fat in places that you don't want to lose. There's something called Ozempic face, where you start losing your cheeks. Okay, now it's bad enough if you lose fat on both cheeks, but if you only lose it on one side, all right, then you become
One
asymmetric.
side.
That's what happens. You start losing, like it because it's lumpy bumping. You start becoming asymmetric. Like one side goes in and it starts to lack fat. That's not good. If
No,
if
because I was
you're
going to say one thing that I've noticed with people that are taking this, and this is more like on a celebrity side than my friends or anyone I
mm,
know, is they sometimes look a bit odd. And I'm like,
yeah,
why do they look odd? And now you're basically telling me why, because they're losing fat in a very odd manner and it's not
that's right.
proportioned.
That's right. It can also
Wow.
cause problems with your pancreas. People have had pancreatitis, not what you want. That'll send you to the hospital for some time and mess with your digestion. And also here's sort of like a uh, uh, hidden footnote that isn't really surfaced often enough. I mean, I'm glad, Sarah, that you're allowing me to have a fair conversation about this. Because don't forget, I started out by saying this thing works, it's useful. There are people who can benefit from it for sure, but because there's a fervor around it. We need to pay attention to be fair, to understand all the ins and outs of a prescription drug. Now, one of the things that's not talked about is that as you lose body fat, so too do you lose muscle mass.
Yeah,
That's not
gosh, as
good.
you said that, that's what just came into my head. As you were about, I felt like my brain was going with you on this, and I was thinking this
Yeah,
muscle mass is so important for our
that
health,
is not
especially
what you want to
especially
actually.
as we age. Especially as we
100%.
age. Yeah.
100%. So look, I mean, and there's many more things. There's also an increased risk of some forms of cancer. In fact, if you were to take the little folded insert out of a package of these drugs and open it up, now it's probably in like 3-point type, but go ahead and look under the, magnify it, and you'll see there's a box warning, at least in the United States version of this. And the box warning says it tells you all those warning signs and also increase the potential risk for cancer as well, some particular forms. So here's what I say. Many drugs can also have all these kinds of crazy side effects as well, but doctors supervise the use of medications that can have side effects. So it's the responsibility of the doctor that prescribes it to educate the individual who's going to use it, and also the responsibility of the doctor to be able to help explain the side effects, monitor for side effects, and to guide the patient if there are side effects. And the reason I'm throwing my colleagues, I'm a medical doctor, the reason I'm throwing my colleagues under the bus and not blaming the patient, not blaming the person using it, is because, look, I mean, if somebody told me there was something that could make you look like an Adonis, who's not going to take it? Or a supermodel,
Yeah.
who's not going to take it, right? Like it's human nature. And the checks and balances here in pharmaceutical world is that physicians are supposed to be responsible. So I kind of feel as a physician, I need to remind my colleagues that, this is something that really requires our judgment, our supervision, our guidance to be able to get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. So that said, I think that now people are looking at it for kids. And by the way, the FDA in the U.S. just approved Wegovy, which is another similar version of a GLP-1 agonist. They found, startlingly, that diabetics who are using these GLP-1 agonists, it actually lowers the risk of mortality from cardiovascular disease. It decreases death. So there's actually an approval to reduce the risk of death in people with cardiovascular disease, or who are at risk for cardiovascular disease and stroke. That's a pretty important permission slip for the FDA to actually give these drugs. But I think that time will tell whether or not this benefit will actually play itself out. But again, remember, we're talking about life and death issues as opposed to choice and vanity type of issues. And remember, I made a big point. I'm not opposed to vanity. I think everyone should feel really comfortable with their own body, however it is. Like try not to pay attention to what other people say about your body, but you should actually have enough self awareness. I think the word you introduced to me is self compassion, to really
Yeah.
be in touch with yourself enough to be able to uh, balance your self image with your own happiness. So I have no problem with that. I think that this is the point you're bringing up, though, is that this is a pharmaceutical that has effects and side effects.
Yeah, I think the sadness for me as a nutritionist looking at this is so much about food, and I feel like you'll align really well with what I'm about to say, or I hope you will, is that it brings so much happiness to me and enjoyment. And the sadness that I feel about when I read about people that have struggled with the kind of relationship with Ozempic, like Stephen Fry, or some people that I've spoken to personally, is that it's kind of taken the enjoyment out of eating and food,
Ah,
because it makes you feel very sick. And so when I'm kind of thinking about how it's working, I mean, there's so many things that I've kind of got to say on the drug personally is that, once you start taking it, we don't really know the long-term side effects of it. So again, a lot of people are reporting that they're actually gaining weight. So it's kind of doing the opposite of what they set out to do. And we go back on this kind of up and down scale of dieting to non-dieting, which again is on the mental health side of things is really not a positive way to be. And when I
mm,
think about my dad, who was diagnosed, who's now not a type 2 diabetic but was a type 2 diabetic, and then his daughter, who's a nutritionist, like stomped on through and tried to explain the importance of diet so he didn't have to go on metformin. We
right,
would do everything to not get him on a drug. And if we couldn't do that and his drug was the only route, then of course that's the route that he would have to go down. But I think
sure.
what I'm finding so kind of mad about the entire situation is that people are wanting to go on to these drugs to have this outcome, whereas I'm thinking when I was working with my dad on it, we were trying everything to not get on that drug. And the sadness is, as you said, injecting every day and taking away the pleasure of eating. I just can't imagine not going to enjoy my food because it's making me feel so sick. And so that's, I think, what is the sadness of it. We're taking away such a simple pleasure of life
I,
by
I'm, I,
injecting.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because for me, the part of my work is actually rediscovering the joy of food, the joy of eating in ways that can elevate our health. And for so long, food has been seen as a negative thing when it comes to health. So you want to cut out, cut down, deprive,
Yes.
eliminate. And I think the future of food and health and nutrition is really to lean into our food, to love our food in order to love our health, as I say. But I also think that, let's remove all the nutrition and, sort of like wellness stuff for 1 second, just 1 second. And to say that if you look at us as humans, part of our humanity is actually to gather and feel satisfaction around food. Comfort food, food associated with the family, food historically brings people together. Lord knows we need that in a world where people are going further apart. Like one of the wonderful things about these blue zones is that if you ask how they, uh, what is the role of food in their lives, food, everybody
It's
gathers around their
community.
food. It's their
Yeah.
community. They
Yeah,
take their time, they
absolutely.
share stories. Like I say, it's food is part of our humanity. Humans have figured out how to make it joyful and tasteful and tasty. And you're right. So, something I didn't explain about the mechanism of GLP-1, we don't fully know all the different reasons why it actually causes you to lose so much body fat and weight, but we do know that when the drug hits the radar dish, the GLP-1 radar dish, and activates the signals in our cells, in addition to the glucose, in addition to lowering insulin levels. The other thing it does is it shuts off our appetite. So, big bummer for people like me who enjoy
Yeah.
food. I want to sit with my family. I want to actually enjoy that meal at the restaurant I'm spending money for. I want to be able to, pay homage to the holidays or whatever, those traditions that are so important for our humanity. And to me, like I literally was with somebody who basically was taking one of these weight loss drugs, and she told me she was with her husband, and she's like, you know what? I'm no fun to go out to eat dinner anymore. I'm no fun to go to a restaurant to because I just not interested. Okay, look, if you are given a drug that cuts off your appetite and you're basically starving yourself, of course you're going to lose weight. But
Yeah,
what fun is there in life? And with all this discussion about longevity, it's not the years, it's the quality. The years are just a number. The quality is something that matters every single second. And so I think food is and eating is really part of the pleasure of life. So why would you want to deprive that if there are other ways to achieve
completely.
similar goals?
Absolutely. And the other term that came up to me is that, and before we move on to the next one, which I also think will link to this, is that the nutrient deprivation I worry about with people not consuming enough nutrients in their diet if they're on Ozempic. So again, if it's all done for vanity purposes and there's nothing to do with if you're diabetic and you're taking the drug because it's actually going to support your health by helping with insulin resistance, is that actually we need good nutrition and nourishment for our skin and for our hair. We need the collagen, the keratin, all of these omega-3 essential fatty acids, which if we're taking a shot on feeling sick, we're not gaining. So for me, it kind of also outweighs the other element of thinking about longevity, all the things that we spoke about in our last podcast, kiwis for DNA repair. I mean, I am full of facts after our last podcast together that can come out with the foods. And I think, we've got all this amazing now research, how you've pioneered this area, yet it's so hard to eat the amount of foods that we need to keep our bodies healthy if we're injecting every day. So for me, it kind of the benefits and the pros aren't stacking up, in my opinion, with Ozempic. But that's, as somebody who's very passionate about nutrition and nourishment on that side.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think that as time goes on, usually one trend will seed to another. Will the tide will go out of one trend and another trend will come in. I just hope that we continue to keep our eye as a society on the ball of health as something that we want to work for our health as opposed to look for the easiest and priciest way out.
That's true. That is true. And it brings me into another term, which this is, can I say that you brought this to light with me on the last show? And I was then scouring Twitter, Instagram, Google, everything for this term because I was like, how have I not heard of this? And I think I'd heard of the isolated terms, but I hadn't heard about the backlash of it. And you said to me, I really want to just put this in while we're on this topic is anti-nutrients. Please do not listen to people putting you off eating spinach because of the anti-nutrients in there. So before we go into what anti-nutrients are and understanding them, talk to me about anti-nutrients on a whole. How can you describe them to people who are listening? And then we'll try and depict it because there's many different ones in there. But
Sure,
it's a really
sure.
interesting one to touch upon, I think.
Okay. First of all, anti-nutrient is not a scientific term. It's not a medical term. It's not even a term in nutrition. It was
I
made
thank
up
goodness
by,
because I thought I was missing a boat here when you said this, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so behind. And actually, it's not a term. It's
yeah.
fine.
It is a conjured up term that has gotten traction in many areas. I mean, and look, the conversation about nutrition and healthy eating is continuously fortified by clever terms and attention getting ideas from people who are out there, making a name for themselves or trying to call attention to themselves. And so I myself was really astounded when I think I might have been doing a podcast and somebody asked me, well, so what's your opinion of anti-nutrient? And at the time, which was a couple of years ago, I had never heard of it. But then I went to conferences and people were talking about anti-nutrients and I'm like, wait. This is not good. And so let's talk about what an anti-nutrient is supposed to
Yeah,
be. It is
please.
used to describe substances, usually in a plant, that that interferes with that supposedly interferes with your body's ability to absorb healthy nutrients. And so therefore you're by eating a otherwise healthy food, you're actually interfering with your own body's ability to absorb nutrients, hence the term anti-nutrients. And by the way, like most urban legends or legends in general, there's an origin to the story. And the origin to the story usually is, and I try to be generous about this, usually a well intentioned person who is not a scientist and who is not, particularly well versed. There's a term. I'll see if I can remember it while we're talking. Oh gosh, I got to figure this out. There's a term. It's an effect, like a psychological effect of somebody articulating or projecting an expertise in a subject that they definitely are not experts in, and it's kind of like not the Obermeyer effect, but there's something like it's something like that. I'll think of it. Anyhow, I think these well-intentioned people came up with this idea. Well, some of these bioactives, natural substances, polyphenols that are made in plants, are defense mechanisms in plants. And so if they're defending the plant against animals eating them, then they must be not good for humans because they're defending the humans from benefiting from it as well. So it's kind of like stretched logic, I mean, honestly, if this were Marvel Comics trying to come up with a new character like the anti-nutrient man or whatever, I mean, like it's that kind of fantastical creation. It's not even a meme. It's not real, but somebody made it up, and similarly to just what you were saying earlier, like the word spreads really quickly. And
Yeah.
once a word spreads quickly, people start using the words as if it was established in the literature. And before you know it, it's kind of out there. Like pretty soon somebody, Sarah, is going to publish in the peer reviewed journal. They're going to use the
I
term
know.
anti-nutrient in PubMed. It's going to get published, and now people will say, "Well, look, it's in PubMed."
But this is what I'm finding really terrifying, because to break it down, there's lectins, there's oxalates, there's physates. I mean, I'm not going to be saying it's probably because I'm dyslexic. There's tannins, but when we think about it, it's in foods such as spinach, beet greens, nuts, beans, raspberries, black tea. Now, I'm naming these. These are all the foods that are eat to beat disease. And these are all like the key foods that we want to be consuming to help with longevity, the big buzzword, to help with anti-aging, to help with a healthy metabolism. And I think what's really scared me was even looking at research for this podcast today. There was dietitians speaking about, I still have a bit of spinach, but just a small bit because of the, the lectins and the oxalates in it. And when it gets to the point with people who are registered and have authority to speak in this, and they're talking about it, and there are certain, I'm saying it like this if anyone's watching on YouTube with quotes in, but showing you for podcasting if you're listening to an audio, people that are biohackers are talking about leptin shred the gut, and we shouldn't be eating brown rice because it's going to cause these disruptions. And the fear that runs inside of me is everything that you spoke about just before this, was saying we've always been told that food's bad and we should be avoiding food. When it comes to ultra processed food, I'm very happy if people say we should be avoiding that at all costs. But when it comes to real nourishment of food, and people are talking about good whole foods that are destroying our gut, I feel very protective of everyone listening to that. And sadly, it's people with millions of followers that have this out there. And I'm thinking the things that I've learned through my 10 years of research is actually we need more of these foods in our diet, the more fruits, the vegetables, the whole foods, the brown rices, the whole grains, the Blue Zones diet that we both love with Dan Buettner. And sadly, the more I've looked into this after you've explained it to me, the more it's getting more and more steam. And so I think to set this straight, like we shouldn't be avoiding these foods, and we shouldn't be scared that they're going to stop nutrient absorption. I'm correct. And
You are
you're
one.
going to back
You
me
are
up on
one.
this.
I'm totally. We are on the same plane, and I got your back on this, Sarah. Well, by the way, this is what I was looking for. Have you heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Dunning hyphen Kruger,
No.
Kruger. Dunning-Kruger effect is
Dunning-Kruger.
basically describes when a person's lack of knowledge or skill on a topic causes them to overestimate their own competence in a topic. So they know they don't know enough about it, but then once they start talking about it, they talk about it with authority. And I think that we see a lot of this Dunning-Kruger effect in the nutrition space, where, as you just described, people start to use terms that actually are nonsense terms that have no basis in science and are in fact incorrect interpretations of facts. So let's see. Gosh, what can I say? Um, Here's the thing. Here's the real fact. The fact is that the polyphenols, the dietary fiber, and many of the other bioactives in plants, terpenes, you start naming all the different things. For the most part, most of these bioactives are incredibly useful as micronutrients to the body because when we eat them, not only do they have a beneficial effect for the plant, why the plant makes them, the food, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, seeds, but when we eat them, they have a second job description, which is to help our human cells also thrive. Now, obviously, it depends on the form in which they come. So, there are great, like genistein is really great in soy, but not in soy filler and not in ultra processed soy. And so the context becomes really important as well. I mean, if you wanted to use an anti nutrient, that term, if I were, writing a script or inventing a new character in a comic book, I would say, no, 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 no. The anti-nutrient way it's used, so that's the way it's used now, totally wrong. Why don't we say an anti-nutrient is actually a food that originally does have real nutrients, but becomes ultra processed in a way so that you don't actually get the benefit of the whole food. That would actually be a more fitting definition of an anti-nutrient. If people were to say, well, ultra processed foods are anti-nutrient foods, all right, I might buy that. But the fact of the matter is, most of these polyphenols, dietary fiber, healthy fats like the omega threes, they fortify our body's health defenses. They light up our own biology. We were born with this. Our health defenses formed when we were still in our mother's womb, and by eating diversity, by eating from the plant-based world, and by not overeating, but by eating this
Yeah.
diversity of plant-based foods, we are lighting up our own operating system, like in a computer, to be able to function better. And everybody is talking about longevity now. If you want to optimize your own longevity, the simplest way is to eat mostly whole plant-based foods and stay away as much as possible, because you're not going to be able to do it 100%. Stay away as much as possible from ultra processed foods and sodas, and huge amounts of red meat. So it's not rocket science. Like, the pragmatic part of it is pretty easy. And I
Yeah.
also encourage people not to don't let the clever the words that get thrown around, the cunning linguists out there, kind of judo throw you by coming up with a new phrase that doesn't really have any scientific weight.
Yeah, I think I'm so pleased that we've cleaned that up, because I think it is now. I mean, I'm a nutritionist. You focus heavily on nutrition and you're a doctor. And I don't know about you, but I open up Instagram now, or Twitter, or any social platform, or sometimes even the news, and I'm terrified about what people are saying who have a platform in this area to tell people that lectins is going to shred their gut. And so I'm really happy that we've touched on that, because we didn't go too far into it last time. And I think it's because I was thrown by your comment. I was like, I've never heard of this before. Now I'm prepared. So I'm really, really happy about that. And I think that kind of looking at those diet trends, I think, are really, really helpful for people, hopefully, kind of going forward. Now, what I want to touch upon is lots of these healthy foods that we spoke about, that I've now dived in so much further after reading your fantastic book, Eat to Beat Disease. Something that many people don't touch upon and talk about, but you are like the master in this area, is angiogenesis and looking at blood vessel health. Now, My viewers might be like, hang on, this has really gone off tangent. Why is that important? And I'm like, there couldn't be somebody more perfect to help describe what angiogenesis, how am I saying it correctly? Angiogenesis.
Angiogenesis, you got it.
I am saying it correctly,
You are
angiogenesis.
good.
I feel like I said it too many times that I was like, does that sound correct? But can you explain to people why this is so important when it comes to our health? Because it might be a new realm for people listening to this to really understand and capture why.
Yeah, well, this is my area of research. I started it in the mid 1980s. I trained in the laboratory of a surgeon scientist named Judah Folkman, who was the pioneer, the godfather of the field of angiogenesis. And what angiogenesis is a fancy word. Angio, blood, blood vessel, genesis, how they grow. So, very simply put, angiogenesis is how our body grows blood vessels. And why are blood vessels important? Well, a lot of people don't know this, but we all, you, Sarah, and myself, we have 60,000 miles worth of blood
It's
vessels
mad.
packed inside our body. 60,000 miles. You know how big that is? Like, just to give you a sense of scale. If you were to pull out all the blood vessels in an adult and line them up end to end, you would form a ball of yarn that would wrap around the earth twice. All right.
Oh my
That's in a single
gosh.
person. So, and by the way, these blood vessels are channels, and they are the highways and byways that bring the oxygen that we breathe and the nutrients that we eat go into our bloodstream, and that's our blood vessels deliver them to every single cell and every single organ in our body, and that's why angiogenesis is important. And when angiogenesis is not, when your blood vessel, your circulation is not healthy, okay, this interferes with oxygen delivery and nutrient delivery. If your blood vessels aren't healthy, there's no way that you can optimize your health. When your blood vessels are healthy, that's the point that you actually are able to do better. You can improve your health. And so, vascular health, blood vessel health is really the go, no go in terms of actually being healthy. And of course, we've known for years that when you clog your large blood vessels in your heart, it causes a heart attack. When you send a clot in your blood vessels to your brain, it causes a stroke, et cetera, et
Stroke.
cetera, et cetera. Or, if you've got Raynaud's, the blood vessels get squeezed down or they
Oh yeah.
dilate. So there's all kinds of, blood vessels are very complicated. All right. So this is my wheelhouse. And the reason that it's really, I'll tell you how I got into the nutrient part of it. First, I recognize that these are the highways and byways of all the nutrients for our body. So I thought about, well, okay, is there a way of right sizing our circulation? What could we possibly do to make better blood vessels? We know that, and by the way, when we injure ourselves, we know that our body is naturally programmed to grow more blood vessels to heal, right? So, have you ever scraped your
Thinking like
leg, your
cuts.
knee?
Yeah.
Yeah, the cut. Or if you ever fell off a bike and you had a scab, if the scab comes off too early, it's bright red underneath. That you're having an
Yeah.
eagle's eye view on all the blood vessels that are growing to heal. All right, your circulation is intended to heal. However, in the laboratory in which I was trained, one of the things that we knew is that tumors, cancer cells, can hijack your circulation in order to feed themselves. So check this out. Cancers naturally form in all of our bodies, healthy people too. And the reason they normally form is because, look, we're made of about roughly 40 trillion cells. That's a lot of cells. And our
Yeah.
cells have to copy and paste themselves so that we're still around tomorrow. In other words, the reason that we continue to live every day is because our cells are able to replicate, copy and paste themselves over and over again. Now, if copying and pasting is not a simple act. It's very difficult to do accurately. So, Sarah, if I gave you, like a sentence to copy 10 times on a word processor on a laptop, you would do it perfectly. If I did 10 times,
I'd
please
get
write this
AI.
sentence.
Yeah.
Yep.
AI can do it for me now.
AI will do it to you. Okay. All right. You'll get it with AI. But I can tell you, if I asked you to copy it 100 times or 1,000 times, it'd be much harder. And then if I asked you to copy it 40 trillion times, it's going to get messed up no matter what. So here's the
Yeah.
thing: when the copy paste gets messed up, the copy paste involves copying the genetics. When you mess up the genetics for copy paste, you get mutations. When you get mutations in the cell, that's cancer. So take a guess. This is a guess, and a lot of the people don't know this. And I wrote about it in my first book. Um, for an average healthy person that's copying pasting themselves every single day, how many genetic mistakes are made every single day, every 24 hours? 40 trillion cells, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, 40 trillion times. How many mistakes are actually made? It's been
I have
counted.
to remember this because I've read your book more than once.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I know
I
there's a
will tell
lot. Well,
you,
I know
it's
there's a lot.
10,000 mistakes are made every day in a
Yeah.
healthy body. Simply because even though we fix the mistakes and all kinds of, look, I mean, it's a lot of, the numbers are big. So
Yeah.
each of those mistakes, each of those 10,000 mistakes in a healthy person turns into a potential cancer. And cancers stay tiny, teeny tiny, and harmless, completely harmless, okay, in the body because they cannot grow any larger than the tip of a ballpoint pen. That's about 2 or 3 millimeters in diameter. They're stuck there because by themselves, they don't have a blood supply. They're not being fed by the highways and byways. So here's the diabolical nature of cancer. This was part of the research I did. Cancers outsmart the body. They by hijacking our blood vessel system, they can hijack angiogenesis, grow blood vessels towards that teeny tiny little cancer. And in the lab, we were able to show that if you have a tumor that you prevent from ever getting a blood supply, it'll just stay there, small, tiny, and then the immune system will wipe it right out. Okay, but if you allow even one blood vessel to touch the tumor to start feeding it, that cancer will grow 16,000 times in size in just 2 weeks. All right.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
it's explosive growth. And so, in the same blood vessels that feed the cancer, allow cancer cells to escape into the circulation as metastases. So, I told you how important good, healthy blood vessels are. But the reason I got into the nutrition space was I started to realize that, wow, maybe there are some foods that can try to prevent tumors from getting their blood supply, anti-angiogenic foods that can cut off the blood supply feeding cancer. So that's what I gave a TED talk on in 2010. Can we eat to starve cancer? Because I was actually showing the early research, now obviously we've come a long way since then, that in fact there are certain foods like tomatoes. Lectins dangerous? No. Nightshades, don't worry about it, not a problem. Okay, tomatoes are healthy. They contain a bioactive called lycopene. It's a carotenoid. Lycopene gives tomatoes their color, as they do papaya and watermelon and guava. And the lycopene actually cuts off the blood supply feeding cancers, both prostate cancer and breast cancer. In fact, men who, and it's
Wow.
been studied this is a study of 30,000 men over 25 years. Those men who eat more tomato sauce, cooked tomatoes, how much? It's half a cup of tomato sauce, cooked tomatoes, 2 to 3 times a week will have a 29% lower risk of developing prostate cancer. Why? Because the lycopene starves the prostate cancer cells by cutting off the blood supply. It's much
And
harder
it's
to
cooked
grow.
tomatoes because that's how what
Yes,
increases the lycopene, isn't it? That is what increases
exactly.
that nutrient that we
Exactly.
need to help starve it. Whereas if you're having whole tomatoes, it's not as strong that effect.
Exactly. Perfect. Great memory. So basically, here's the thing. If you pick a tomato off the vine and eat it like an apple, it's delicious. You'll get your vitamin C, you'll get some dietary fiber. It's all good. All right. But if you want that lycopene, the form of lycopene that occurs in most tomatoes in nature is not that easy for your body to absorb. But you can easily change that lycopene's chemical structure into a form your body loves to absorb simply by heating it. So if you heat it, a cooked into tomato, simmer it, you actually change the chemical nature, and then that's why cooked tomatoes are a lot better. It's a lot easier for your body to absorb. Now, lycopene is actually what we call in chemistry fat soluble, meaning it's the chemical structure. For those of you listening or watching, if you're not a chemist, you're going to just have to take my word for this. There are some chemicals that are not that easy to dissolve in water, right? Like, but it'll dissolve really easy in oil. So that's why, water and oil don't mix, and some things dissolve easily in water. Some people don't. Some things dissolve much easier in oil. Lycopene dissolves in oil, so it's fat soluble. Oil being a fat, and so if you want to really absorb the lycopene, which is fat soluble, you want to cook your tomatoes with a little bit of olive oil.
Olive oil.
Extra virgin olive oil will dissolve that lycopene, and you can get 3 times much lycopene absorbed compared to if you just cook tomatoes with water.
Wow.
Okay, and so this is
Amazing.
where it is. Honestly, it is amazing. I every time I think about it, I am really quite amazed by how clever humans are in inventing these recipes. Because, I mean, you don't have to go very far to find some yaya or nona's recipe in the Mediterranean. Cooking tomatoes with some extra virgin olive oil, right? So again, some of the tastiest foods are some of the healthiest foods, and the ways that the old traditions have guided us, the old recipes have guided us to prepare them, are the ways that actually deliver the most health as well.
Wow. I mean, that is fascinating because when you were thinking about, when you were saying and breaking it down as genesis as growth, I was thinking, how is this going to go to cancer? Because we don't want to grow cancer. But now you're saying it's the opposite, that there's certain foods that kind of stop that growth and cut off that blood vessel.
Yep.
And so I'm just thinking about it in terms of prevention, where I'm very passionate about this. So if people are trying to reduce it, and I think I heard in your TED talk, or maybe it was somewhere else, where you were saying that we all have microscopic cancers. Because I think now we normally know somebody very, very close to us that sadly has had cancer or had a diagnosis.
Hmm.
And has either lived through it or sadly lost somebody through it. And so for now, it doesn't feel too far away, that big C word. But I think now we're more aware of it than ever before, that I think people are wanting to know that there's something that they can do to support themselves. So what would you say are like the 5 foods that people should be including if we're thinking about reducing cancer risk or trying to starve
Okay.
that cancer?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tell you those 5 foods, but let me
Okay.
first say one more thing to set this up. Our body, to stay alive, makes 10,000 genetic mistakes every single day. Each of those mistakes can lead to a microscopic cancer. How do we know that we actually have microscopic cancers? Because we're not all walking around like filled with tumors, are we? Well, actually, this has been studied. In
Wow.
autopsy studies of women who died of not cancer, but car accidents, suicide, violence, 40% of women between the ages of 40 and 50 at autopsy are found to have these tiny little harmless microscopic breast cancers. 40%.
That's
50% of
huge.
men, 50% of men between the ages of 50 and 60, 50%, half, have microscopic cancers in their prostate. If this is from autopsy studies, if they died of something else, car accident or whatever, okay, and in people who are 70 or older, okay, 100% of those people have microscopic thyroid cancers that are so small, so harmless, so dormant, it'll never kill them. Okay, they die of something else. And so the fact is, we already know that walking around, we all have little microscopic cancers. And by the way, this is changing our own definition of cancer as the scary disease. Because look, what I just told you, Sarah, is like cancer at its very origin, at its beginning. It's kind of like a pimple. If you see it on your face when you're looking in the mirror, you're washing your face, you're going to be focused on it. And you're going to want to do something about it. But you know what? We've all got pimples growing on our backs and on our butts that we don't actually see every day, and they're not a problem. And eventually, our skin will regenerate and take care of it, and we'll never even know you had the problem. And that's really what the issue with cancer is. So, what can we actually do to tip using nutrition to tip our uh, to tip the chances that we can actually prevent the cancer through food, through nutrition. And this is actually what you're asking. Like, what are five? There are hundreds of foods, by the way, but what are some top five I can come up with? And I'll try to give you some of their doses as well. All right, because
Yes,
dose is
please.
important, food doses. So tomato, we already went to one. Tomatoes. Tomatoes have been
Cooked.
shown to lower, well, actually, regular tomatoes as well, but cooked
Oh,
tomatoes
okay.
especially. Remember, cooking makes it just a lot better, but eating regular tomatoes is good. So, but the dose of cooked tomatoes is eating one serving, each serving being half a cup full of cooked tomatoes 2 to 3 times a week for trying to protect against prostate cancer. About the same for decreasing the risk of breast cancer by about 25%. Okay, one food.
Wow.
Another food, green tea. Now, there's all kinds of stuff about green tea. We all know it's green tea. It's the look. I have a
It
background.
really
I have a
reminds me of you. Every time I
ah.
make a green tea, I think of you.
Well, listen. My great uncle lived to 104, mentally sharp,
Wow.
independent, and he attributed his longevity, to really living at the foothills of a tea mountain, a mountain that grew tea, and he drank tea continuously. But the research has shown, both in the lab and in clinical studies, that drinking somewhere between 2 to 4 cups of green tea per day actually lowers your risk of lung cancer, colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, pretty substantially. All right. And that's a good thing. So, tomatoes, green tea. Another one that has been shown to be beneficial. Some people might be surprised to hear this: soy foods, not processed soy, not artificial, not synthetic stuff, but actual soy. I'm not talking about plant-based meats. I'm talking about real tofu, tempeh, soy milk, that kind of stuff. And there's hundreds of kinds of soy foods in Asia. All right, you go to any Asian grocery store. If you look around, you'll see a myriad of choices of soy foods. If you go to Asia, I guarantee, like if you're from the Western world, you go to Asia for the first time, you're going to be overwhelmed at how many different kinds of choices you have with soy foods. And soy has been shown to reduce the risk of breast cancer. Okay.
This was what was in my mind when I was thinking, what cancer? Can I ask before you explain
Hmm.
why to see if my thought process is right here? Is that more in women that are perimenopausal or menopausal because their estrogen levels drop and having soy has got high estrogen in and so it maybe replaces that? I don't know. That's just a concept that's coming to my brain when you said soy. I could be really off the mark.
It's the right idea, but let me kind of clarify it for you. So it turns out that, well, first of all, an urban legend is that all women should stay away from soy because soy has estrogen, and some forms of human breast cancer are sensitive to estrogen, so dangerous to actually eat soy. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. All right. In China, in Japan, in Vietnam, in Thailand, breast cancer is out there too. And I guarantee you, if women are diagnosed with breast cancer in Asia, they are not told to stay away from soy. In fact, they're told to eat more soy. And here's the reason why. It that soy does have a plant estrogen called phytoestrogen. One of them is called genistein. And again, where did the urban legend come from? Look, some well-meaning soul knew that breast cancers are sensitive to estrogen sometimes, and they saw phytoestrogen, and they're like, well, I best stay away from soy and then used whatever communication medium to spread that urban legend around. And now everybody believes it. Even oncologists believe it. To be honest with you, like even doctors are repeating this urban legend. But here's the thing: if you are a scientist and you look at the actual chemical structure of human estrogen in breast cancer, and then you look at the phytoestrogen chemical structure, they don't look anything alike. And in fact, plant estrogens block human estrogen. So the soy estrogen is like tamoxifen. It's Mother Nature's tamoxifen. It blocks the effects of estrogen. So this is why. And by the way, the genistein in soy also cuts off the blood supply, feeding breast cancers. All right, so you get a
Wow.
double-barreled effect. So a study of 5,000 women in China looked at the highest risk women, and these are women who already have breast cancer, and found that those women who consumed the most soy products, not processed soy, but soy products, actually had a 30% lower risk of dying of their breast cancer. 30. Okay. And if you were a woman who already had surgery and radiation and chemo, and you were out, like you're in remission and just waiting for that 5 year mark kind of thing, if you those women who had the most soy had a 30% reduction in their breast cancer coming back. All right.
Wow.
Cancer starving, estrogen blocking, all these other things as well. Now, and so this is where, having parts of the right information and trying to put them together is okay, but you got to double check it, for people who really understand the science. So I just gave you some clinical data showing reduction of risk, reduction of mortality. This was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. But some critics, some skeptics say, that's one study. Sure, let me see another study. Well, I don't have one other study. I've got 14 other studies that all show the same thing. In no case is soy consumption associated with worse outcome. In every case, it's associated with better outcome. And yet there's this urban legend
Amazing.
going around, like the same anti-nutrient story that you were talking about. This is
Yeah.
why podcasts like this, YouTube things like this, and people who write books like me and you, like that's why we have the responsibility to be able to try to communicate with clarity, the what it is that we do know, right? Because I think otherwise, remember I told you this, like the Dunning Kruger effect. Everybody starts to think they're an expert in this stuff, and they're not.
Yeah, it's true. And this is why I started the show, because I was so fed up of hearsay around medical advice. And so I thought, let's just bring every top physician on here and let's just have the conversation so people can actually figure out what's right for them as an individual who's got their own genetic makeup, and they can make their own decision. And that's why we did the show, for this
So,
exact
so,
reason.
so I got two more foods to give you. I gave you
Yes.
tomatoes. I gave you green tea. I gave you soy. Um, uh, I'll give you another food that is, I think, quite important is blueberries. Blueberries
Mm,
actually amplify our immunity. The anthocyanins that give blueberries their beautiful dark blue, black color actually cut off the blood supply to cancers. But at the same time, they also enhance our immunity. And what we now know is
perfect.
that our immune system, cutting off the blood supply, prevents the cancers from growing up. Remember what I told you, your immune system wipes them out. So you really want that. Blueberries are small but powerful. They're like totally good. And by the way, if you can't get fresh blueberries all year long, no problem. Frozen blueberries are also equally good. So, okay, so that's number four. And then I'll actually tell you that uh, uh, sort of the class of fruits like apples and pears are also beneficial. They
Mm.
are great sources of bioactives like chlorogenic acid. What does chlorogenic acid do in the lab? Cuts off the blood supply to cancers, but and it's also anti-angiogenic. Also starves off the blood supply, and improves immunity. But the dietary fiber in these foods also activate our gut health. They improve our gut health. Our well-fed gut bacteria lowers inflammation. They release the short chain fatty acids, I'm sure you talked about before on
Yeah.
your show. But the other thing they do is that a well fed gut microbiome also directly nudges the immune system to say, hey, go out there and go get them and wipe out those cancer cells, those microscopic ones.
Mm.
Okay. And so I would say this would be five foods that, by the way, are available anywhere in a grocery store, inexpensively, right? That are delicious. and you can find different ways to cook it. Now, I didn't have time to talk about the bok choy, the shiitake mushrooms, about the garlic. I didn't talk about red onions. I didn't talk about rutabaga. There's a whole bunch of these other foods, and I make these whole lists in my books, Eat to Beat Disease and Eat to Beat Your Diet, and the whole idea is that I think it's wonderful news that we're now beginning to understand that the foods that have been used in by different cultures for hundreds of years, generations, these foods, like the one you held up,
Yeah, I
actually
was trying to
are
show.
they're delicious, and you can find something good. And by the way, this is the other thing. People go, man, what if I don't like blueberries, or what if I don't like apples? It's okay. You can easily swap them out with some other food that's on there. And so this is part of the fun of making healthy choices. This is not hard. It's easy. You just have to be selective, right? I mean, like people out there, you're listening to this. I'm sure at some point in your life, you discovered that you wouldn't just date anybody, but you wanted to be selective of who you took to the movies,
That is
right? Or who you,
important, by the way.
right,
Yes, it's a
right?
very important decision. Who you spend your time with also affects your health.
Exactly. So why would it be any more difficult to choose healthy food? And I want people to start thinking about things like that way. Making
Yeah,
healthy food choices is like making healthy date choices, you know?
completely. Honestly, I completely agree. And I think going through those top 5 foods, I want to put to the listeners to pick one of those foods to add into your shopper basket this week and try and include in your kind of diet regime. But the one thing that stuck out was soy foods. And just for any men listening, because I know we spoke a lot about women there and the studies on women and the reduction of breast cancer, there is a lot of fear around men eating soy. And I thought I can't leave without asking that question on what's your view on men having soy as well? Is it exactly the same effect? Or because there's this whole
Uh,
conversation around men and getting moobs with soy because of the estrogen. So I thought I should
yeah,
just ask that question for
no,
anyone who's going to
because
write that in the YouTube comment because they
it,
will.
it, it's a good issue, but don't forget what I said. The human estrogen and
It's
the soy
different.
estrogen are different. They don't have the same function. In fact, it's a blocker. The soy is a blocker, so I wouldn't worry about that. I also want to point out, particularly as people are getting older, that soy in its whole form, like edamame, or its fermented forms like tofu and tempeh, etc., they're good sources of protein as well. And we talk about all the bioactives and all that stuff, but let's not forget about the fact that we need good, healthy intake of protein. That's something that is so important as we age, to have the proper amount. You don't want to overload yourself on protein, but you also don't want to ignore some of these plant-based foods. People go, well, if you're telling me not to eat red meat, well, I'm not going to be having that much protein. Wrong. You know, Soy foods, nuts, and legumes, great sources of healthy proteins as well. So let's not forget about that.
Yeah, I think also that's really important because we're talking a lot about plant-based foods here. Soy is one of the proteins that is a vegetarian source or a vegan source, plant-based
Hmm.
source. There's so many different terminologies to use, but a whole plant-based food that does have all your amino acids in that you need. So also it's a fantastic one that if you're plant-based to definitely include in your diet to making sure you're getting all of your essential amino acids that you need. And it takes me on to kind of my last question, which I think is very linked to cancer, but it's around sugar and sweeteners. Now, there's this huge debate on, I'm going to have a diet soda or a diet Coke, or I'm going to have a full fat Coke. And then a lot of people say sugar feeds cancer. And there's this whole debate that goes round and round and round, and how sweeteners are bad for our gut microbiome. And actually, they make you more hungry. And so I find this kind of narrative landscape that a lot of people come on and ask the question. And it was one of the questions that was asked for this show today on, I'm so confused. What should I be choosing? Is sugar really bad for me? Is sweetness really bad for me? In ultra processed foods now, they're all kind of used with a lot of sweetness as well to make it a lot
Yeah.
sweeter. And thinking of my father, who is a type 2 diabetic, which is also why it came to my mind, he uses a saccharin in his tea every day and says, no, it's fine, it's great. I don't have the effects of sugar. So I thought it was a perfect way to kind of finish off the conversation around the sugar sweetener debate and
Now, it's
how can one navigate that.
another very, very common and confusing topic that's all out there. So let's try to break this down. First of all, as a scientist and as a doctor, I can tell you our body needs sugar. It requires sugar in order to be able to function. In fact, the most sugar dependent organ in our body is our brain. In order for our brain to function, you want to have good cognition as you're aging, you're going to need to actually make sure your brain is actually fed. In fact, if you don't feed your body sugar, your body will panic and figure out how to make its own sugar or sugar equivalents, which is really sort of the keto diet forces you into that
Yeah.
position. It's a
Yeah.
stress response, okay, like a rescue response. But let's talk about this. Sugar. Most people love sugar. Me, that's me. I love a sweet something sweet, right? Who doesn't? The key thing is this: we get sugar naturally in our in the food that we eat. Uh, here's some sweet foods. Obviously, oranges, watermelon. Nothing more than I like more than a juicy summer peach, or an amazingly ripe, juicy pear. On different ends
Yeah.
of the season. But that plant-based sugars in a whole food form actually are not harmful to you, mostly because the eating the whole food contains all the other good stuff, the fiber, the bioactives, the polyphenols, all this other stuff that lights up our body's defenses. And obviously, if you have a normal, healthy metabolism, your body will suck up that sugar lickety split and put it to good use. All right. And again, as long as you don't overeat. And I'll come back to that in just a second. It's better to eat it. I just address it right now. It's better to eat it in a whole food than even in a juice. Here's an example. If one of my favorite things in the winter, I'm a foodie, so again, I'm very particular about the food that I eat. But there's a kind of orange that we see in America called the Cara orange. It is a largish orange that is incredibly juicy, and the juice is incredibly sweet. Man, to eat one of these things, it's one of my favorite oranges. And I would eat an orange like that every day for breakfast, for example, when it's in season. Now, how many of us go out and you're traveling and you go to a hotel, you go through for the breakfast, and somebody comes by and say, "Do you want some orange juice?" And they pour you a glass of orange juice, right? They fill it all the way up. You know how many oranges it takes to make a tall glass of orange juice? I had to look this up.
Seven?
It
Seven?
takes
Five? Seven?
very good, no, great guess. It takes 7 to 8 oranges to make a tall glass of orange juice. Now, I would eat one orange gladly, including the dietary fiber and all the other stuff. Okay, but in orange juice, you're not putting the fiber in there. You're removing the fiber, right? That's the empty husk after you squeeze it out, but you're getting the sugar of 7 to 8 oranges. So that's an example of where making a good choice would be eating the whole orange rather than having
Yeah.
that tall glass of orange juice. And by the way, it would probably take me, I'd probably nibble on an orange or slowly eat it over, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because I'm not going to pig out on it. But, tall glass of orange juice, swig, 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 swig. I could glug that down right away and ask for a second glass. So again,
Yeah.
sugar is important in its whole form with whole foods, but even then you can overdo it, especially in juice form. So
Yeah.
that's not harmful, and that doesn't quote feed cancer. I want to come back to where that urban legend came from, because the
Yeah.
origin stories are important. It helps you remember. But the kind of sugar that is metabolically damaging, the kind that you don't want, the kind that does cause inflammation, is poor for your overall health, your cognition, your immune system, everything else, is added sugar. Added sugar.
Okay.
All right. Added sugar is what is in a can of soda. An 8 ounce can of soda, all right, contains 7 to 9 teaspoons of cane sugar. So, Sarah, if you came into my house and I wanted to offer you as a host something to eat, and I just gave you an empty glass and put 7 or 8 teaspoons of sugar and say, "Here, eat it."
Who knows
Disgusting.
where that interview would go? It would be everywhere.
You'd be bouncing off the walls.
Yeah.
But But the point is that you wouldn't do it. One wouldn't eat that, and yet we swig down cans of soda all the time, and
Yeah.
so and that's not good for you because there's no other. It's like there's no other value. There's no nutritional value in a soda. Now, what about the artificial sweeteners? Okay, the
Yes.
story is less clear there, but there's a pattern emerging. Artificial sweeteners like saccharin, stevia, aspartame, sucralose, all these kinds of things, monk fruit, they are intended to be a substitute for cane sugar, for glucose. All right, with this idea that, especially the artificial ones that aren't getting absorbed at all, they don't give you calories, but they're super sweet when they're on your tongue. And so they give you that sweet hit to your brain. But supposedly they don't contribute to your metabolism, right? Wrong. It turns out studies have actually shown that those people who are using diet sodas to try to lose weight actually gain weight. Now, or they don't lose weight. Now, why might that be? Well, it turns out, and this is the emerging story. It's not black and white, but it's starting to crystallize and it's starting to look more gray to black. So it's not that we don't have the complete conclusion yet, but many of the artificial sweeteners seem to impact the gut microbiome negatively. Many of them kill the gut microbiome. So what was happening? Can of diet soda, glug glug glug. Look, hey, doesn't get absorbed in my human body, my human cells at all. Goes straight down. The chemicals go straight down to feed the gut. Now, our gut bacteria is sort of like this black box. We're just beginning to discover how sensitive our gut is. And from the research so far, which is still in process, what we're looking at is a lot of these artificial sweeteners damage our gut microbiome. When you damage your gut microbiome, you raise inflammation. When you damage the gut microbiome, actually your glucose sensitivity, your insulin sensitivity goes down. Your glucose levels go up. And by the way, you grow body fat when you actually damage your gut microbiome. So again, you get the sweet hit, but you're not actually getting all the other benefits. In fact, quite the opposite is what we're starting to see. So I'm hesitant to give you a black and white on that, but I want to talk about cancer again. So where on
Yes.
earth did these myths come from? Like the sugar in cancer, sugar feeds
I
cancer.
don't know.
I mean, like it's kind of a crazy idea. Like who would have come up with the idea? Let me tell you. In the
Oh, you know, love
1980s,
this.
yeah,
Yep.
in the 1980s, there was a cancer scanning technology called PET scans that came out. There's CT scans and MRI
Yes.
scans, and anybody who's dealt with a cancer patient will probably have heard this. There's something called a PET, PET scan, all in capitals, positron emission tomography, and a PET scan doesn't look at physical detail. So CT, MRI scan, man, you see all the little crevices and crags and shapes of a cancer of your organs. PET scan, you don't get any of those shapes, but you get metabolism. So cancers are very metabolically active. All right, they're out of control. They're kind of like it's kind of like a heroin addicted ball of cells. They're going crazy. So when you do a PET scan, you can see the metabolism. How do you make the metabolism light up? Well, to do a PET scan, we inject the patient with glucose and we radio label the glucose and we can actually see where the glucose went. And we can see the glucose flows into the tumor and the tumor is very metabolically active. So we see through the radioisotopes, boom, it's like a fireworks. You really see the cancer. So it's from that technology that is visualizing where a cancer is, from whence came this urban legend that cancers eat sugar, and that when you feed somebody sugar, it'll actually go into the cancer and it'll make the cancer
It's
grow
cancer.
faster because you're giving it calories. I was, kind of right, but very wrong at the same time. So sugar doesn't actually feed cancer. People go, "Oh, I've got cancer. I better not eat any fruits and vegetables." Wrong. You better eat fruits and vegetables because those polyphenols are cancer starving. They improve your immune system. The dietary fiber improves your gut health, lowers inflammation, aids your immune system. For gosh sakes, you definitely want to eat foods, the whole foods that actually do contain these natural sugars. You're not going for the sugar, okay? You're going for all the other stuff that the sugar's in, and it's not going to hurt you. It's going to help you. So again, a little backstory is like, listen, understanding the history of these urban legends, doesn't that actually help you remember like why they exist and why they're wrong? Like, I think it's so helpful.
It's so helpful. And I think it is literally the essence of this entire conversation today of where these kind of small conversations start and how it goes into hearsay and how it's very misinterpreted. It's basically Chinese whispers. To give it
Exactly.
like the short answer, it's a
Yeah.
Chinese whisper.
Yeah.
And I think I also love that you said, I'm not going to give you a black and white answer on that because that is actually science. Like when people say, well, what's better for me, a full fat Coke or a Diet Coke? Or any kind of diet drink or full fat drink, it's actually like, well, maybe a tea or maybe water is, there's kind of pros and cons against both. The sugar in that is not going to be great for your teeth or good for your metabolism. And again, the sweetener is not going to be good for your gut health. So either way, there's a compromise on either
Yeah.
one that you're choosing. And I think sometimes we're very much just like, tell us which one to have and we'll have it. But actually, sadly, sometimes the scientific answer isn't the fun one. And that's what I think is the hard bit, where actually it's neither. It's more tea and water that's going to be the best for your health, as opposed to and it's one of those things which is where balance comes into the conversation, which you're so fantastic at bringing across, and that's what I love about your work, is that you are so much around balance. So if you really want a Coke, have one, but just don't have one every day. And I think that's the essence of so much about Eat to Beat Your Diet as well, and even Eat to Beat Disease. It's having everything in balance and kind of giving an extra emphasis to those kind of key foods, those 5 foods and all the other ones that you speak about in your book, Eat to Beat Disease, to put into our shopping baskets. And naturally, the bad ones just kind of fall out to the side, is what I kind of see. So I could talk to you forever, but I really have to ask you the last question. And I'm really wondering if it's good. I'm going to have to look. I should have done this before to see what your last answer was, because I asked you this before. But it was Dr. William Lee, what does live well, be well mean to you?
Well, I have evolved my answer to this because I think that more and more my answer to that question is feeling that I'm thriving. Thriving
Love that.
is really feeling, you can interpret a lot of different ways: fulfilled, happy, energized, purposeful, all those things. And I think it's very personalized. I think the definition of what makes you feel like you're thriving is different for every individual. But for me, as I've been doing a lot of contemplation about my life and where I've come from and where I'm going, one of the things that I think is a mile marker for how well I'm doing is actually whether I feel like I'm thriving.
I love that. Thriving. I'm gonna put your 2 last ones together and see how they've changed in that last
You do
year. But
that.
it's amazing. Honestly, it's every single person that comes on the show has a different answer, and I think it just sums up the perfect explanation of health. That every single person is so personalized in their approach to what it means to live well, be well, and even yours has changed in the last year. And I think that literally sums up what living well, being well is. That it's all individual and it's literally what it means to you in that moment. And I'm so happy that right now it means that you're thriving and it means to be thriving. So, William Lee, thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, it's definitely not the last. There's going to be so much more. So many more unanswered questions that I know we're going to get into our YouTube comments. But for now, thank you so much. And we can't wait to have you back on.
Thank you.